So, Corinne, you asked me to think about this in terms of the advanced Spanish learner class, and I am heritage learner. But since I'm figuring I'm still a literature course, a lot of the same ideas would apply to an AP literature class from my perspective. Though in writing an AP Spanish literature syllabus, sorry about the dogs barking in the background, I may have to use language that's a little more appropriate to AP or a little more palatable to the AP readers, the people who judge the syllabi, but you know what I'm talking about. Anyway, so starting with student growth, the whole point of the course is that students challenge themselves to read texts that serve two purposes. One, those texts are a representative sample, as we're talking about in the major competencies, of Hispanic literary works, but also are samples of a cultural product that the students, because the students will set cultural competency goals. And setting goals is a major part of the first two student growth tools. I already do this in my classes, and I want to continue to do it in my AP classes or advanced classes. Students use a global self-assessment tool. I'm not going to click to it, but there's a link in the maps for it. It's an ACTful self-assessment tool. They will look at that tool and decide, where am I right now at the beginning of the semester, each semester, on these scales, and then they will set, on these proficiency scales, and then they will set goals for themselves in conversation with me. Similarly, I've got to develop some kind of rubric for cultural competency. I have a couple sort of in mind. That would allow them to set similar goals about learning about culture in the Spanish-speaking world. Both of these would go in their e-portfolio as a reflection or in a discussion journal as a reflection, and we would want to collect artifacts throughout the course from the e-portfolio that show progress towards these goals. Obviously, they would get regular feedback from me and regular feedback from their peers. In terms of major competencies, they would want to read and comprehend a representative sample of literary works, discuss the text within their social and historical contexts, the ones in which they were written, and also in the literary movement or the cultural movements or the artistic movements in which each work was written. Consider the text as a product that represents certain cultural perspectives and be able to discuss that. Make comparisons between the socio-historical context and the cultural perspectives that are represented within these texts and the students' own perspectives, and also use those comparisons to discuss the pertinence of these literary works in the modern world. They would also need to develop their analytical writing and critical thinking skills as related to the analysis of literature, and that would include looking at literary devices, looking at kinds of language, analyzing older Spanish versus more contemporary Spanish, thinking about the Spanish from Spain versus the Spanish from Latin America versus the Spanish from the U.S., because all of these are included in this course. So it's harder with the pathway options simply because they have to read. You can't say here, well, we could have audio texts. I've thought about that, but I'd have to find them, so I might need some help with that. So they would have a reading assignment always. They would probably follow that up with a written reflection, and that reflection might include interaction with peers, or it might be a written reflection simply for me so that I can see where they are at the end of the reading. They would have peer-led discussions and also discussion questions that I provide. In order to learn about the context, they might have video lectures on the works or time periods or movements. I might actually have them do individual research projects and presentations and report back to their peers about those movements and time periods so that it isn't all information coming from me. That's what I usually do in my classes. It should be fairly transferable to an online course. They would have to provide individual text explications, sometimes written for me, sometimes oral for their peers, depending on our goals. or they might choose which one they might want to do. It depends on their skills. Some of them will prefer to write rather than speak. I might give them options to do that sometimes. There would be collaborative research projects and presentation of the findings there. There would be formal essay writing. All of these things, what I may do actually is give them choices about what their summative assessment would be and how many formative assessments they might complete. I have to really think about this more. This is just a beginning. Okay, so finally, operational elements of the course. Every time the course, every week, we would have to have an organizational video and presentation of the learning objectives. I would want them to perform a self-assessment to figure out what they already know about the topic, the text, the theme, the author, because they may already know more than they think they do. And that would help us decide what holes an individual student might need to plug up. They would have their weekly reading assignment, and they would have some choice about their support materials, a written reading guide or an audio-video reading guide, a written or audio introduction to the author or literary movement, and the socio-historical context. There would be comprehension assessments. They would be formative. Basically, it's to see if they understood the reading. Presentational assessments, such as formal essays or formal presentations, may be individual or group collaborative works. And they will need to have some summative tests, at least for the AP version of this course, because they need to be able, they need to develop that test-taking skill of reading comprehension and listening comprehension with multiple choice for the AP exam. But also because girls have a hard time sometimes making choices between certain multiple choice answers, as we know. They second guess themselves because two answers are possible in their minds, and that making that commitment to the best one is often hard. So I'd like them to practice that a bit. Committing to, and that could happen in other ways. They could commit to an argument and argue for a certain answer. That could be kind of fun, actually. And then there would be weekly discussions with peers, perhaps over one of those tricky multiple choice answers, but I'm also thinking about debates. It's kind of fun to do a debate about whether one particular character, San Manuel Bueno Martir, is truly a martyr and a good man, or if he is a hypocrite and an actor and bad. And so that kind of thing might be fun for them, and also a good way to incorporate the text. It's hard. Oh, the time got cut off. Well, okay. It would be about 3 to 4 hours of reading. An hour and a half or so of interactive and formative activities with their peers. I'm talking about journaling, discussion boards, voice threads, things like that. A couple of hours, possibly 3. Some sort of collaborative enterprise. I think we would probably do a wiki project maybe for certain works or for certain themes. We might even present a work. Like an individual student might present a specific work to the class, and then they could have a discussion. And then there would have to be a more formal summative task. Sometimes it could be with a partner, sometimes not. Usually it's going to be presentational writing or speaking. So that's what I'm thinking.